Hello, friends. Welcome to Villains, Voices, and Variance, a writing podcast by Zen Madman and the Ethical Panda. Here's your host, Matthew Davis McCreary Fox, aka the Ethical Panda.
Hello, everybody. This is Matthew, and I'm joined by my wonderful co-host and narrator, Mr. Paul Hoppy. Paul, how we doing?
Doing good. Yeah, doing good this morning.
I'm really excited for this podcast that we're jumping into. And this is something that Paul and I have been talking about writing and poker and villains and all sorts of other things for blah, blah, blah the years since high school.
Exactly that many years.
We don't have to say exactly how far and all, but more than half of our lives. And in this last year, and we have a little trailer that explains more of it, but in this last year, we've both engaged in a writing project, and we both are of the opinion that why have thoughts in our heads that we don't share with each other, and why share it with each other if we don't share it with all of you? Because there's a little bit of narcissism in both writing and podcast hosting. You put the two together, and, well, you can't throw tomatoes at us through a podcast, so hopefully we're safe.
That is an advantage.
And we're going to be doing kind of a weird structure where each week we're focusing on something different. And in week one, always, we're going to be focusing on the writing process itself, talking about what we're writing, talking about why we're writing it, talking about how that process is going. Week two, Paul is going to talk about the specific thing that he's writing, which is a blog about poker and with sharing poker insights and stuff like that. Week three, we're going to talk about other writing and how we feel about it, what we like and what we don't like. We're going to start off with a line that is, I won't say beloved by Star Wars fans, but is a hot topic in the writing of Star Wars. And then week four, we'll be talking about my topic, which is I'm currently writing a book about villains in superhero media and things like that. And so if you love all of it, tune into all 4 episodes. If you just want to listen to, one or two of the weeks at a time, go for it. If you're following us live, we're never going to be recording on the weeks that line up, so just don't worry about that. That's the week it comes out. But for now, let's actually talk about writing. And for both of us, this is something that we've wanted to do for a while, that we're trying to figure out ways to make it happen. I've been thinking about writing a book for years and years. Paul is a much more prolific writer than I've ever been. He has numerous books published. They have blogs and all sorts of great things like that. But for both of us, we need to keep picking up that pen or the typewriter or computer and whatever it's going to be. So, Paul, let me just start by our main topic. Why do you write?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I first started writing, it was like they told me to in school,
Yeah.
And then I still remember the morning. It was like a bright winter morning. I had my new computer and I just started writing a story. I wrote like 10 pages and I went to school. And if I kept that page stuff, I'd have been a more prolific writer. But, to really, the main reason is because I have an idea or a story and I want to share it. And I want to share it in a way with some degree of permanence, as opposed to just having a conversation, right? Which I also enjoy. I love. And obviously podcasting, you can lend in a degree of permanence to your conversations. But I think there's something about writing where you can really take something and codify it, right? And put it into this form where it's like, this is the way I want to express this idea that I have right now. And I just really enjoy it.
I mean, it by definition has a sense of permanence to it that something like a podcast does not. And I think especially that's in terms of, it often if you were to read the transcript of a podcast, it would take you 1/5 to 1/3 of the amount of time, depending on how slow or fast a reader you are, or how fast you're listening to this podcast. But also it just, the words are right there. It's firm, it's specific. You can take a paragraph and send it to your friend and be like, I really love this writing, or like, oh, look at this terrible sentence, whatever it is.
That's
you can take, you can take, like, it's a lot harder to take a quote out of a podcast and take it out of context and then yell at the people about it. But with writing, it's so easy to do.
So easy.
And isn't that the fun part? So, and I have to admit, for me, that's always been a part of what has scared me about writing, or at least has held me off. It is the permanence. And part of this is kind of, for me, I've realized more and more as we thought about it, kind of philosophical, because my background is I was a pastor for many years. I did a lot of nonprofit advocacy, both through the church and outside of the church. I've left that life. My religion is still there. I've left that life. I'm no longer a pastor. Still am in some ways, but I'm not. I'm not practicing in that regard. My religion is certainly wide open. But one of the things that I got in seminary was this idea that a sermon is never finished. You just give the latest draft of it. Because part of the idea was that when you give a sermon, a speech, you're entering a conversation with all the people who hear it, and they're all going to interpret it in different ways, and a lot of them are going to be happy to tell you about how they interpret it. and some of it is going to be criticism, and some of it's going to be well-warranted criticism, and some of it's going to be helpful, and some of it you're just going to have to bite your lip and smile as they shake their hand and say, well, thank you so much for sharing that. Next. Or thank you so much for sharing that. Hey, Mrs. Phillips, how are you doing today? But writing, but the idea being that it's still a conversation, that you're not done. And I think there's a philosophy of that I really like, of that we're always learning, that any idea I have can always be improved on, that it's never finished, that it's never done. But that's also a way of hiding. That's also a way, I think, sometimes of being a bit of, I don't mean that preaching is or sermons are, but that sometimes there's some value to saying, look, this might change, but right now, here is what I think. And I'm willing, I have thought about it, and I've been open to questioning about it, and I've edited it based on how people have given me feedback and changed my thoughts maybe, or been strengthened in my thoughts. But now I'm willing to say, I am able to stand by these words enough to give them some permanence. And I think that's for me the hurdle with writing that's always been there. And I think that's what this year I really want to be able to overcome.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot there. I think the first thing that came to mind for me when you were talking about, giving a sermon and the idea that it's a conversation and it's never really finished is recording music compared to playing music live, and how
Oh yeah.
often there will be there's like an idea that like the recorded version is like the real version, right? And I think in my experience, I've recorded a handful of like EPs and stuff, and
Right.
generally after recording the thing, playing it live just felt different.
Yeah.
Where it was like I felt like I kind of said my piece on record, and in order to really record something exactly the way you want, the same way in order to like write something, you have to like look at all the details and really dig in and try and get each bit as good as you can. And then for me, then playing live, I'd feel like all those things were right there, and I would still change it though. Like I'd still kind of riff on it, right? And you hear bands and musicians do that all the time, where they're still going to make little adjustments live, and maybe it's like, oh well, that's the recorded version, but live this might not work as well, or something else will be, it's not going to hit the same way, or maybe there's something that will work with a live audience that won't work as well. And so the written word is like, you're not getting feedback from your audience in the middle of your thing, right? You're trying to create the whole thing, and then you give it to someone, and then they read it, and then it's it's up to them how they interpret it and how it hits them. But for me, I don't know, I really enjoy the challenge of like taking a thought and presenting it in a clear, engaging fashion, taking words and playing with them, trying to fashion them to something concise and coherent, or sometimes expansive and not so efficient. But being able to say like, this is the way that I want to say this, and at that point it kind of feels like nobody else might be able to say that exact thing in that exact way. And to me, that's kind of what like finding your voice or whatever is like where you get to the point where your writing feels like it's an expression of you, but it is an expression of you at a point in time, right? And so I think I look back at stuff I've written decades ago or whatever, and some of it I'm like, I would say this differently now, but like also it's like that's a different person, right, who didn't have the experiences that happened since then. And I just think it's cool to be able to have something that's there, and like you've kind of taken your stand at that point in time, and it's like, this is what I want to say. And I mean, I think a lot of what we're talking about is more kind of nonfiction oriented, right? But the same can be true in fiction as well, where
Sure.
your reflection is your fiction is likely to reflect your perception of the world, and as your perception of the world evolves, changes, whatever, your fiction is probably going to change.
Yeah. No, I think that's very true. And certainly, I did a interview on one of my other podcasts, Superhero Ethics, with a guy named Michael Bland, who has written some really interesting novels specifically about a dystopic future of a surveillance state, where the surveillance state is just a lot stronger. And in my interview, I talked with him about what is it like to be continuing to write books where, the first one he read was the first one he wrote was, I think, 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And we have much more of a surveillance state now than we did back then. And that has to adjust how he's writing. And I remember I used to go to sci-fi cons a lot and things like that. And so I'd often go to live readings. And there's one author, I wish I could remember who it was, but we all had our copies of the book open. We're following along as he did a reading. And one paragraph, it was just different. And he could see our confused face. He's like, yeah, no, I realized I didn't like that sentence structure, so I just changed it. And to me, that's what I think of when you talk about that the live music thing, because one of the things I think about is that we kind of have a real range now between, you do have some shows where they're probably going to play it pretty much note for note because all of the dancing and the lighting, like a Taylor Swift show, that's an experience as much as it is just a pure music concert, and everything is incredibly choreographed, and I think that's awesome. But it means the music's going to be note for note, like it has to be the same.
Right.
Then think about like jam bands, like the ones in my generation were like Grateful Dead and Fish, but I know that theme continues. The whole point there is that a song might last 20 minutes because one guitarist might be like, oh, actually here, I'm going to do this 5-minute riff. And then the drummer's like, cool, I love that. I'm now going to do a total thing that I'd never thought of before until you played this passage in a totally different way. So yeah, I love that. I think that kind of variance can apply so much to writing as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a note on Taylor Swift, because I feel like I need to. I think she actually played 2 songs acoustic, like 2 different songs every day. And I don't know the details. We could ask our friend, but I do think like when you're doing a little acoustic kind of smaller kind of breakdown thing, like there probably is a lot more room for a little bit of improvisation and things like if there's a guitar solo, like you can change the solo, but you're probably not going to change how many bars it is.
Right.
Because like you've got tracks and there's all this stuff going on. And the bigger the show, the less it's just like, oh, do you want to play this other song right now? Yeah, sure.
Because then like all the dancers are like, what are we doing now?
Right, exactly.
If you do something like change it from like 3/4 time to 4/4 time in the middle of a song, like that's going to really screw people up.
Right. It's like, wait, so this is a tango now.
I did that to Paul in one of our musical performances in high school.
True story.
Let me though ask you that, because you're someone who's been writing for quite some time, and am I fair in saying that like the overwhelming majority of stuff that you have published is nonfiction about poker?
I would say the majority.
Yeah.
I'm not sure overwhelming, but yeah, definitely the majority for sure.
And just in talking to you, I know that like the things you would tell me about poker 15 years ago are different than they are today, in part because I'm a slow learner. I'll figure out something you were telling me, and then I'll be like, look, Paul, I did this. You're like, no, that's not how you do it anymore.
Right.
So talk about that in terms of the, like, because my sense is that you've written things 10 years ago that at that point you were like, this is how I think you play Jack 10 suited in this kind of situation.
Sure.
That today you would write differently. And I think have there been times where you've written something and been like, yeah, 10 years ago in this other book, I put it differently, but here's either because my thoughts have changed or because the world of poker has changed. Talk about that process.
Oh yeah. I think of it a little bit like scientific literature. If you read scientific literature from like the 1500s, it's going to read a lot different, right? But similarly, like if you read stuff from 10 years ago, right, it's probably very different in a lot of areas as well. And to me, that's when it's something like that, the idea is that it's kind of this ongoing search for truth. And for that reason, people often like to recommend writing with like strong language and don't have a bunch of qualifiers, and you don't want too many adverbs. And I think there is value in that in terms of trying to maximize how hard your writing hits, right? But I also think there's danger in that where people have a tendency to overstate their cases. And, one of my pet peeves / favorite things to complain about is people taking something that's true and stating it in a way that's so definitive that it becomes false.
Yeah.
Right. And
But if I just want to make sure I understand. So, for example, taking the kind of advice you gave of your writing hits harder if there's less qualifiers and less adverbs.
Yeah.
If I then said never use adverbs in writing ever for any reason whatsoever,
Right.
that's the kind of example what you're talking about, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, which happens in our own world
all the time.
All the time.
Yeah. And I mean, it's maybe most dangerous in like politics and things that are going to have large effects on large numbers of people, but even in small things. And I think sometimes I know you and some other people I talk to find this an irritating habit that I have of somebody states something that's mostly true, and I kind of try to like offer an adjustment, or at some point I think we will do an episode on corrections. Like there's a difference between corrections and like a disagreement, and I think the way to kind of try to deliver that maybe a little bit more tactfully sometimes, along with like sometimes maybe just being like, okay, that's fine. I don't need to comment on every time something doesn't sound perfect, right?
Look, there's some nits that need to be picked.
Right.
You know?
I mean, nits are just baby lice. Do you want lice?
There you go.
Come on.
There you
go. But I think one thing I try to do often when I'm disagreeing with people who I largely agree with on like a subject is like to try and state the part that I agree with. And I'm, like, okay, mostly I think this is true, but also this. But then like, don't forget, I'm agreeing with the main point, but just like this thing is, and when it comes to poker, the main thing about poker is like, we're always just weighing different options, right?
Right.
Like the only thing you're really doing in poker is thinking, okay, what are my available actions? Like, what can I choose between doing? And which one of these is better than the others, right?
Yeah.
And, you could say a lot of life is that too. Or, where in poker, it's a little more obvious. It's like, okay, the expected value is like, how much money are you going to make in the long run? Whereas in life, it's like, well, there's the enjoyment now, there's what the consequences later, there's all these things, right? But I do, yes. I mean, to get back to the original question, poker is something that has changed, like the thinking, the prevailing thinking has changed dramatically in the last 10 years, 15 years. My first published poker book was 2010. I guess that was also my first poker book. I don't know why I said published. Like, I don't have like a stack of like unpublished poker manuscripts. I might have some fiction that I never published, but yeah, my first poker book was published in 2010. I wrote it pretty quickly. I think it was very good, very strategically sound for the time period it was written in. I sometimes go back and take a hand from it, and I like analyze it with the modern tools, modern solver, and go back. And some of them are like, oh, hey, that was pretty good, And some I'm like, oh, that's not true, Now, it might have been true at the time, given the assumptions of what other people were doing.
Right.
Because that's the two things. It's like, there's like, how does the game work? And then there's like, what are people doing? And how should we respond to that? So yeah, you would hope that it keeps getting better, right?
Yeah.
If what you did 10 years ago doesn't look at least a little bit bad, then you probably haven't improved enough since then.
Right. And you maybe haven't taken risks in ways that sometimes are helpful. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that's something we're going to talk a lot about, is how to sort of stand behind the permanence of writing, but not to the extent of like, I'm going to give you the final definitive thought on Magneto, and thus it's like, no, I'm going to say at this point in time, here's how I see that in the villain context I'm looking at.
Yeah.
Because this is a topic we've talked about for decades, literally. And I know that I'm the sort of person who loves qualifiers. I love giving all of the, okay, well, remember as I say this, that this, and this, and this, and this, and this. And I remember being terrified by Twitter when it first came out and thinking, why would I ever think I could express any cogent thought in 140 characters back before it was 280? And then if you paid more, it was however many or whatever, because I always wanted to have all the qualifiers. And part of that is because I'm autistic and I just wrestle with that. And because I had a lot of problems when I would say things that I thought you could assume qualifiers for. and then people took out of context, or because I said it stupidly or whatever. And so now I'm like, okay, I don't trust you to understand what I'm about to say, so I'm going to say it with all of these qualifiers. But also, the fact that I'm saying that might sound really pretentious. It's not that I don't trust you, it's that I don't trust me. And now the person's like, are you okay? And I'm like, no, don't worry about that. I just want you to understand this thing I'm saying, but I need to do 3 minutes of qualifiers first.
Yeah.
And in religion, we talked about this a lot, because I've always been part of, very progressive ends of religious communities where we look at the dogmatism of a lot of, the fundamentalists and conservative evangelicals and things like that. And it's like that, this is everything wrong, and it's weird. I didn't expect to talk about religion so much, but I think the Bible is a piece of writing that gets talked about an awful lot. And, to me, one of the things that I've always really loved about the particular version of religion that I follow, of Christianity, but also I think is true in a lot of other traditions as well, is there's so many times where someone comes to Jesus and asks him a specific question that should have a specific answer. And he responds by telling a story and not giving a specific answer. And I think that also informs a lot of the media that I love. I think Ryan Coogler is one of the foremost speakers on race in America today. But he's never just been like, here's an essay with all of my thoughts. It's like, here's my thoughts about what happens when Black people get pulled into white communities that are very oh no, we love you, we promise we do. Here's the movie Get Out. People talk about the Irish oppression in relation to slavery. He doesn't write an essay about it. He gives us the movie Sinners, which is an amazing story, but also is a way of engaging with these questions. And where is I going with all this? So the point being, I have always had this love for complexity, for nuance, for giving you ways to say, here's how I'm thinking about the question. And I hope that informs how you think about the question, but you don't have to come to the same answer as me. But as you said, that's not hard hitting. The joke we used to have is that's really hard to burn a question mark on someone's lawn. To say
yeah. Wait till your chapter on the Riddler, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Well, that too, but also just how do you take a statement with 8 different qualifiers and nuances and put it into a bumper sticker?
Yeah.
It's and I think as I engage with writing, that's the real balance, is how do you balance between putting in the qualifiers that are needed, putting in the nuance and the context, and saying, hey, outside of this context that I'm talking about, this statement might not be as true, without it just drowning in that, and without you getting to the point where, again, in a kind of a cowardly way, you're not saying anything.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the answer is it's difficult. Language is powerful, can convey so many thoughts and ideas, but at times it feels like it conveys none of them perfectly.
Yeah.
Right. And that's I would say that's the challenge,
Yeah.
I mean, I just want to say that sounds like mad Buddhist of Jesus in what you're describing, which I won't go on this tangent. Something about what,
I'll just say, Jesus and Christianity by no means invented the idea of answering a hard question with a story.
Sure.
Rabbis have done that. I'm sure that I think it's a big part of Buddha. I think that is a tension in almost every religious philosophical community has been one person saying, okay, I don't want to give you simple answers.
Yeah.
I want you to think in new ways about the question. And then the followers going, cool, let's bury that down into a very specific answer to the question, and then let's kill anybody who disagrees.
Right.
And then someone else come along and be like, no, you didn't get it. The whole point is to be more complex. And that's
and then when you were talking about dogmatic thinking, it's funny, literally just yesterday, I was defending a particular strategic point of view, right? It was about range betting. You don't really need to understand the details, but essentially that you can simplify your strategy and that makes it easier to execute, right? And that in this basically this is a viable strategy, this is a reasonable thing you can do. And then someone was like, well, just recently you were basically saying that you were rejecting such and such, and that you were just you were pushing back against it, and they were like, have you changed your tune on it? And I was like, what I generally push back against is dogmatic thinking, which is I use that exact phrase because it's in poker all the time. It's everywhere, right? Everywhere. Because
So I
there's
can find 10 different books or coaches who will teach me 10 easy rules to follow to win at No Limit Hold'em.
basically, yeah, and they won't all be the same. And like it's possible none of them will be wrong, right?
Right.
None of them will be the whole truth. But it's I think dogma is so popular partially because it's a little bit useful to be
Yeah.
able to simplify something and either one way or the other, whether it's being pro simplification or you can be anti simplification, and that can also be a simplification if you're like, well, never do that, right?
Right.
And it makes it easier to think when you're considering fewer factors,
Yeah.
and when it's something like poker where you actually do have limited time to make your decisions, which I guess all decisions in life technically we have limited time to make them, but it's you can't always consider everything,
Right.
right? And so I do think it's like anything, find doing the best with what you've got, and that brings us back to like first editions and second editions, and your first edition is hopefully it's pretty much the best you could do at that point in time.
Right.
And at some point you've just got to hit publish, you've got to send off a manuscript, whatever it is, and say like, this is good enough right now, this is what I can do right now.
Right.
And then a year later you might look at it and like be like, oh, there's a math error in my book about poker math, I need to fix that, and then you fix
Yeah.
it, right? And you can do other editions and whatever. Often when I'm publishing, when I would publish blogs, I would publish it, I'd like write it and then
Mhm.
like do a once over, publish, and then do a deeper review, and then like
Yeah.
make adjustments. And I still do that because I mean, I'm on a deadline, which we'll talk about next week.
Mhm.
But the idea basically being like, yeah, you gotta send it off at some point,
Yeah.
right? And I'll tell a story, not a long one. But like when I was younger, especially, I still do this, but I used to do it a lot. And you could say it was like mostly like more specifically like talking to girls or whatever,
Yeah.
or like, but not just, I mean, just like talking to anybody. I would often be like trying to think of exactly what I wanted to say, how I wanted to say it, instead of just like talking, right?
Yeah.
Just having a conversation and feeling like, oh, that's not just the right way to say the thing I want, or this could be interpreted that way or the other
Mhm.
way. And I think as a kid, I had a certain level of shyness that came from that
Yeah.
like wanting to express myself just the right way. And I would say I don't have that anymore, certainly not to anywhere the same degree. Um, but I do feel like writing is actually a very powerful way of kind of getting around that, I
Yeah.
guess, where when, if we're having a conversation via text and we're chatting and I'm typing something, like you don't see what I'm typing till I hit send.
Right.
And so I can like say something wrong or the wrong way or whatever and be like, I don't like how that sounded. I'm going to go back and edit that a bit. And in right now, I can't do that. I can't be like,
Mhm.
oh, you know what? I actually want to change this word or that word. And I mean, obviously, the miracles of post-production do
Right.
sort of allow that, right? But, certainly if it's a live stream or anything, verbal communication just doesn't work that way. And that's fine, but
Mhm.
writing does, like, it does allow for a certain ability to get things just the way you want them, at least at that point in time.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's one reason that a lot of people who skew towards like introverted like writing a lot, probably.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true, and probably why for me, as someone who's very, very extroverted, has always really wrestled with it, but also
Mhm.
why I'm excited about it, because you're right, there is a permanence and an immediacy to what we're saying, even though it's kind of in a format where people don't expect it to be as fixed. And
Yeah.
I've definitely had episodes where I go back and listen to them later, and sometimes we've had like listener complaints or people writing in, and we've been like, yeah, actually that was kind of a dumb thing to say. I'm gonna post a like correction about it.
Mhm.
Um, or sometimes just circumstances change. Earlier in the year, in March, I had a podcast come out about the ethics of award shows. And we recorded that before the BAFTAs, and it was supposed to come out after the BAFTAs. And it turned out a really important ethical issue came up during the BAFTAs. And so I contacted my co-host and was like, hey, can we talk about this again? You know, and the same way that sometimes like a second or a third edition of a book will have a forward that's like, hey, yeah, you know, I wrote this book on police violence and the problems with it and the response to it. And then George Floyd happened after I published it. And I thought maybe
before I published it, after I turned in my finished manuscript and they were already, you know,
yeah, exactly.
laying it out.
Stop the presses. So
yeah, exactly.
Anyway, speaking of stopping the presses, we do want to keep these episodes fairly short. Any closing thoughts you want to offer on this topic that I'm sure we'll be done with and never have to return to?
Yeah. I think my closing thought would be basically there's no wrong reason to write. There's a lot of right reasons, and you don't have to have just one reason. You know, I have written for money. I've done copywriting. I've ghost written magazine articles, and like that was fine. You know, I enjoyed aspects of it, but that wasn't necessarily like passion driven, right? That was just like, oh, I can make a good hourly like doing some of this, right? And I've written stories that like I've never really shared because I was just like, I just want to write this story and I don't necessarily want to put it out in the world, you know? And then there's other ones that I'm like, you know, I might have a particular person that I think, oh, this person will enjoy reading this. Like I literally have a story that I'm like, I have to write this story like within someone's lifetime because they're the person like I'm writing it for the most, you know? And, you know, because writing something that when I was younger, I remember like having just this list of things I wanted to do. And I was like, well, writing something I can do when I'm older. And that's both true. And also, oh my goodness, if I'd just been writing this whole time consistently, you know, I think that would have been good, basically. And now I am older, you know, in the middle somewhere. And I'm like, yeah, I want to get back to this and do this regularly and consistently. And it doesn't have to be a big project like a book or a weekly newsletter or whatever. Like sometimes just the first thing I published was just an article in like a new online journal that was something about poker legislation. And it got out there and I was like, oh, I published something. I mean, I'd written a couple blogs, right? But like this was like the first thing that was like published by someone. And it was like, it wasn't a big deal. I don't think I got paid, but it was just like, it felt good and it was nice. And it kind of broke the ice, broke the seal, whatever. It was like, okay, I can do this. And, you know, within a year, I was like, hey, I have a book idea. You just started a book company. Like, do you want to publish my book? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, cool. And then they're like, do you want to write? Yeah. Do you want to, you know, co-write this other book? And I was like, sure. Here's some money. I'm like, hey, this is pretty cool. And so it's like, you can have grand designs. That's great. There's nothing wrong with that. But just like, if you can find what you enjoy about writing and, you know, and put something out there, I think is an important step to some degree, you know, but it doesn't have to be, you know, if you just want to write for yourself, that's cool too, you know? So I just hope more people, I mean, that's one of my hopes with this podcast is just that hopefully we encourage more people to actually write more, you know?
No, I think it's great. I think it's going to be, for me, I think it's that I've gotten comfortable with short form. I've gotten comfortable with Twitter. I've gotten comfortable with TikTok. And now I want to go the other way. You know, now I want to go into something because part of my comfort there is the immediacy and the safety of that. And I want to kind of take away that safety blanket and say, I'm going to write a book that I can stand by. So, well, thank you all so much for listeners. If you're writers, why don't you start by writing us an email, writing us a tweet, writing us something you can attach to a carrier pigeon, except do it in the most humane, ethical way possible because we are animal lovers here. But whatever it is, send us in the information. For right now, use Matthew at the Ethical Panda. No, for right now, use I don't know if Villain's Voices and Variance is going to be a Gmail yet. For right now, write into Matthew at theethicalpanda.com. We'll have an email set up pretty soon. Tune in next week when we're going to have episode 2 talking about Paul and what they're writing. And most importantly, thank you so much. We have written.
Word.